join later. Right, okay, well, thank you, everybody, for attending early. Especially big thank you to Richard and LSBUD for organising this. And also, I know we haven't got everybody joined yet, but on the delegate list, we've got people from Singapore, Norway, Australia, Netherlands, and the Canaries. So for people who are outside our normal time zone, I really appreciate you all joining and taking the effort to be part of this process. So a big thank you to you all. This is hopefully the first of several breakfast meetings, and I was asked to do the first, which I'm very, very pleased about. And as Richard said, it's going to be very relaxed, more of a Q&A, and hopefully it's going to be a meeting of minds. And yeah, there might be some subjects that people disagree with, but I'm hoping that most people are supportive of what we're trying to do, and that we're trying to improve the industry, improve processes, and improve health and safety. So the little subject of what I'm going to be tackling today, and there's going to be different subjects pretty much every month, is I want to talk about PAS 128 and what it does. Many of you I work with regularly and will know the PAS 128 process, so apologies for that, but some of you may not. So I wanted to explain in not too much detail what it is and what it tries to do. So actually, first, before I do that, I just want to tell you a little bit about myself before we launch into it. So I was one of the 4 authors of the PAS 128 specification that came out in 2014. Very honoured to do that, and 4 of us sat around a table and we took lots of industry information, lots of people engaged with us, and we pulled all that together in what I believe is a very good and robust specification. As I say, that was launched in 2014. It's actually up for renewal at the moment. There's a rewrite going on. I'm part of the steering group for the rewrite, and we hope the new version is going to come out in the spring of next year. So watch out for that. There'll be loads on social media, on LinkedIn, when it finally launches. We're just going through the final draft as we speak. It's not a radical rewrite. There's a few things that we found out didn't really work in the 2014 version. That's going to be rectified, and there's also a client guide within it, so it helps clients understand what PAS 128 is. What we failed to realise in the first instance was that this was aimed at the survey practitioners, the surveyors. What we didn't realise was that many clients need to know that and weren't as genned up, weren't as knowledgeable about the process as we thought they may be. So what we've now done is put a client guide at the back of it, so clients understand what they need to do to specify a PAS 128 survey and what they're likely to receive at the end of it. So that rewrite comes out in spring of next year. There's also another PAS document that not many people know about, and it's called PAS 256. This came out a couple of years after PAS 128, and it's all about newly buried assets and assets that are visible in trial pits, trial holes, and excavations. And it's all about how you record assets that are either newly laid or have been exposed in the ground. And it's about georeferencing them, how you georeference them. And the idea is that we want all exposed utilities to be referenced in the same way, so that eventually, it's several years from now, that there'll be a commonality in the way that utilities are recorded. And part of that is obviously geofixing it, having a tape measure off the side of a building saying the water main is 5 meters from the corner isn't acceptable anymore. It has to have global tie-ins and things of that nature, and how we show depth, how we show materials, etc., etc. So if you're not really aware of PAS 256, please look it up. It's not nearly as well known as PAS 128, but please look it up, or at the end of this presentation, my contact details are going to flash up. So by all means, any of you, if you need to contact me on anything about this presentation or anything outside this presentation, my email address will be there. Please give me an email. I'll be happy to discuss with you. So I'm also act as a consultant to various utility-related projects and organisations, mainly in the UK. Could I just have the next slide, please, Richard? What I do now is, sorry, is there one before that?
Didn't think so, John.
Okay,
Sorry.
not to worry, not to worry.
Blame me on that one.
No, don't worry. Just a little bit about what I do now. I run a company called John Robinson Associates, and I provide consultancy to clients. And I basically bridge the gap between clients and survey company to make sure that clients understand what they're getting, how they get it, and help them use risk mitigation to make sure that there's very little or no damage on site. So it's letting the clients understand exactly what's happening with a PAS 128 survey, providing them with hopefully very rigid and robust survey data, and reducing risk all the way through the project. And that's the theme of it: reducing risk. So let's move on to what I'm going to be talking about. What I intend to do is I'm going to go through this slide you're looking at now. These are the 4 steps of PAS 128, and I'm going to go through those in a little bit of detail, and then I'm going to throw it open for debate. And the idea is that I introduce the subject, and then we all just talk about it. And that is essentially what this session is going to be about. So the PAS 128 process, it's a fairly lengthy document, but this is probably the most important section of it. And this describes how the 4 processes work on site or off site to reduce risk. Now, there's some commonality here between the Australian, the American and Canadian standards, and we call them survey types D being the lowest, A being the highest. Now, if you look at the arrows at the bottom, there's 3 arrows, red, amber and green, and they're meant to represent risk. High risk, medium risk and lower risk. There's never no risk, I'm afraid. So I've put those arrows there just to show the risk going from left to right. So looking at the 4 PAS 128 types, going from the left, we have what PAS refers to as survey type D. Now this is also referred to as stat search, various other names, but it basically a desktop utility record search. So this is what obviously LSBUD do all the time. You go to all the known public utilities, you ask to obtain their data, you either pay or get free their data, you obtain their data, and you put it in a tabulated form so that you know exactly what public utilities are likely to be in your job site area. Now, as we know, utility records can be very accurate. They can be very inaccurate at times. And there's big disclaimers on every utility record drawing saying that the utility asset owner isn't liable for any mistakes or omissions. But it tells us usually if in a street scene, if there's a pipe or cable within that street scene, sometimes how many, how deep they are, the material, etc. Sometimes it can be very detailed, sometimes not so, but it gives us a guide as to what public utilities are likely to be in a job site. Now, I stress they're public utilities. It will not show private utilities. There are times where it will show main supplies to large commercial buildings, such as a hospital. They may show the HV ring, cable ring, and the gas supply into a hospital, but it won't show the distribution electric around the hospital. It'll, because that is deemed as private, it'll only show public utilities. So at times you'll be looking at a private site and you may not have anything in there because all the public utilities are outside in the street scene. There are also times where you look at a piece of ground and you're thinking, there's nothing in there, it's a piece of private land. And you will find a trunk sewer running through it, you'll find an HV cable through it, a medium pressure gas, a high pressure gas. All sorts can run through a job site without any street furniture there at all, which is why it's so important to do. Relatively inexpensive, and it should always be done very, very early in the design process. So that is essentially survey type D. We now move on to survey type C, which PAS calls site reconnaissance. Now, this could be a little bit confusing to some. And the reason we put this in here, because it mirrors the American and the Australian standards. They use the same D, C, B and A. And site reconnaissance means you go to site, normally armed with a land or topographic survey, and you look at the street furniture on the site, physically look at it. You look where the manholes are, the valves, the lampposts, anything to do with utilities. And also armed with the survey type D, utility search data, you try and match one up with the other. For example, you may find a sewer on the sewer record drawings showing the sewer on one side of the carriageway. When you actually visit the site, because of the street where the street furniture is, it's fairly obvious it's on the opposite side, and that's not unusual. Sometimes it can be 3, 4, 5 meters out of scale. So by looking at the street furniture on site, you can ascertain roughly, and I say roughly, where the underground utilities are. We don't lift any manhole covers, we don't get any survey instruments out. It's purely a visual walkover accompanied by the survey record data. This enables us to give a better idea of where things go, but it's a bit rough and ready. I certainly wouldn't want to design, dig, or do anything with data based on just survey type C. But again, it's relatively inexpensive and can be done early on in the design process. Next, we're going to move on to survey type B, and this is probably by far the largest section of PAS 128, and it's what most people here will be very used to. Survey type B, called detection, is the use of multiple geophysical instruments to try and detect underground utilities. PAS 128 dictates that you must use a minimum of 2 different instruments, and the 2 that have to be used on site always are ground penetrating radar, GPR, and electromagnetic, EML. For those who get a bit confused by EML, a lot of you will be very familiar with the term CAT, cable avoidance tool, and Cat and Jenny. Cat and Jenny is a type of electromagnetic locator. It's a more simplified version, and you'll see a lot of people using it on site when they're digging holes or investigating. Most surveyors use a more upgradable EML locator called the RD8000. Similar principles. The idea is you transmit a radio signal down a pipe or cable. That signal goes down the pipe and you pick it up with a handheld receiver that tunes into that frequency in its very simplistic form. So that those 2 are the minimum you must use for a PAS 128 survey. You can use lots of other types as well, but as a minimum, you should always use every section of pipe and cable. You should always try and detect with those 2 methodologies. And the idea is that you crisscross the site in various different patterns or grids, which I won't go into now because it's a bit complex, but you cross the site trying to detect all those underground utilities. And if you find it with 2 instruments, using 2 different instruments, then you've got a high probability you've got it in the right position. If you only find it with 1, it's probably less likely. So we're able to grade all the data that we send back to our client and say, I'm pretty sure that I found the utilities in this location, or I'm confident. And you give it a quality code. If you only find it with 1 instrument, or you can't get a depth on it, you reduce that quality code accordingly. And we call these quality codes, they're numbered from 1 to 4. So 1 means we're really confident we've got this where we want it. 2, 3s, and 4s means less so. So every 5 linear section of utility means that we've been able to detect that section of utility, and we're able to give the client a guide as to how successful we've detected that section. Now, up until fairly recently, it was fairly common for when you finished a detection survey that you put in CAD and you send it to the client, and that would be where the survey process ended. Now, I disagree with that slightly. I think there's a massive own goal here that we're not really exploring. Many clients don't really understand what we've done. Our clients can range from architects, city planners, engineers, and they cannot be the master of everything underground. They know have knowledge of a very broad spectrum. They're not specialists in our field, and so we're in danger of supplying lots of data that they don't truly understand. And PAS 128 refers to a post-survey debrief, which I think should be mandatory and should be done on every project. The way that I do this is I do it virtually. You don't need to visit site. We visit we deliver the CAD drawing, and then a couple of days later we arrange a Teams meeting, and we talk about the project. We talk them around it. We walk them around virtually around the job site. We explain the underground utilities, what we've been able to detect, what we may not have been able to detect quite as successfully as hoped, what difficulties we found on site. Then we ask the client, what are they doing? Why are you having this survey done? And normally we ask them to overlay their design. And it may be a new building, it may be new sewer pipe, whatever it is, they overlay it onto the utility survey. And then we can look at pinch points where their likely excavations are going to impinge on the existing utilities that we've detected. We can then look at how well we've detected utilities in those areas and look at the quality codes we've given them as to how successfully we've been able to detect them. Now, we can then discuss with the client, there's a medium pressure gas pipe. We haven't been able to get it that successfully. What do you want to do about it? How high is the risk? If you're excavating in that area, potentially there's a very high risk and you need to know exactly where that gas main is. Now, there could be various other things that can happen. We can revisit the site with different frequency GPR. We can try and get it more accurately. Or we then move on to the final part of PAS 128, which is survey type A. PAS 128 calls survey type A verification. Sorry, Richard, could you go back a slide? Sorry, no, thank you. Thank you. Verification means the visualization and actually physically seeing an underground utility. Now, the way PAS 128 do it, this can be by two different methods. This can be either by slit trenching or trial holing, which is normally done by hand dug trial pits or vacuum excavation. So you actually dig up the utility and look at it. Or visual identification can be done inside manhole chambers. So survey type A is verification by trial holing or visual identification inside manhole covers. So inside manhole covers, obviously you'd photograph it, you would do sketches of it, and you can physically see what happens inside that chamber. But the same with a trial hole. And the idea with a trial hole is you expose the utilities, you survey them in with a survey grade instrument. So we've got XYZ coordinates of every utility. We take photos, cross sections, and that can be invaluable for some clients to allow them exact alignment. And it can be done safely. It can be done strategically at certain locations. And we're able then to see exactly where the utilities go without doubt in that particular location. Sometimes we repeat it several meters down a linear carriageway so that we can see the variation in between. Richard, could you do next slide, please?
John, sorry, I think Pete's got a question. He's raised his hand. I just wondered if it was a relevant question for now.
Sorry, I didn't realise that.
It's
Pete,
all right.
go ahead.
So, John, I had two questions actually, or observations. What I'm seeing more and more of is contractors like utility contractors who are just using Cat and Jenny, but still referring to PAS 128. I've seen it recently where the documentation method statements say, has the survey been done to PAS 128? And I'm kind of, you can't do it to PAS 128 for a number of reasons, but the main one is you're only using one type of technology to start with. You're only using a Cat and Jenny, and I just wondered what your thoughts were on that and whether you've seen the same thing, because it seems to be a bit of an increase of them thinking they're doing it to PAS 128, just to use the term PAS 128, when actually they're not. They're just locating things with a Cat and Jenny.
Right, I hadn't actually seen that because you're more in tune with contractors daily than I am, but that is quite worrying. As you rightly said, it's not PAS 128. Then they're not using radar, and no, they are doing a standard EML survey, which is what we all used to do 15, 20 years ago, isn't it, Pete? And to be honest with you, we did it fairly successfully, but time has moved on. The amount of non-metallic utilities in the ground has moved on hugely, and as we know, radar is very good at tracing some underground utilities, not so on others. And it's the same with EML. If you're digging a hole just with EML, then I personally would be very worried. I understand why it happens in an emergency situation where they're doing emergency utility repairs, because everyone has a Cat and Jenny and that's all they tend to use. But they're certainly not following the PAS 128 process at all, and that is very misleading.
I mean, they're not even producing a drawing or any kind of deliverable anyway at the end of it. I'll email you some documentation over to have a look at.
Okay.
The other thing I was going to comment on, which I thought might be worth going through, is the prerequisites before each survey level, because I think that causes confusion. were
point.
in a B without a C. So I thought it might be worth talking about the prerequisites of each one before you went on to the next stage. What was recommended and what was mandatory?
Yeah, please do. Richard, can you go back a slide? That's a very good point, actually, Pete. I tend to forget about that. Right. So we've got the 4 survey types here. A prerequisite for any of the survey types is you must do a survey type D, desktop utility record search. You cannot jump to a C, B or A without first of having a survey type D. You have to have survey type D. It has to be within 90 days and it has to be complete. It's no good saying I've got the electric and water and I can't be bothered to get the rest. Not good enough. You need to go to every known utility provider in that area, have up-to-date records, have the correspondence, have the drawings for that area. So before you can do anything else within PAS 128, C, B or A, you must have a survey type D. That is mandatory for all other survey types.
John, I think I'd love to add to Pete's initial comment on that sort of challenge of getting the typical contractor with a Cat and Jenny in his van and really trying to understand how to get PAS 128, get them to better understand what PAS 128 is, and also the clients. You inferred that earlier. What's the how can we do that better? So better understanding of what PAS 128 is and the limitations of using EML only, and then also the sort of client side. To me, there's kind of 2 areas, and I'd just love to hear your thoughts on how we can improve that.
Yes. Well, we're almost a victim of our own success here because the way BSI, who actually produce PAS 128, don't really publicise it. They'll put out a few bits on LinkedIn, etc. But essentially, they let the industry promote their own standards. So PAS 128 was launched, so thank you very much. It's up there, and it was up to us. And so it's people like me, Pete, and other people who went out there and did lunch and learns, presentations, etc., to inform people about PAS 128. So essentially, we concentrated on the clients, the WSP, the Arabs, and the companies of that nature, who were obviously providing income to survey companies. What didn't really happen was it didn't filter down to people like contractors who are digging holes day in, day out, because essentially we rightly or wrongly perceived that PAS 128 was aimed more at the design stage early on in the construction process. Before construction, it actually says that PAS 128 is not there for emergency works. It's there for a design phase or construction phase of a more measured construction process. So that's the type of companies that were targeted. Obviously, there has been companies that engage with contractors, and Pete and other companies like his do an awful lot about it in that area. And there's Cat and Jenny courses. And what we need to do is engage more with people who do emergency works, who do planned works, but have guys on the site who are employed to dig holes, to mend pipes, fix cables, jointers, etc., who have probably had a Cat and Jenny course and need to expand their knowledge. Now there is now radars coming out on the market that are a lot more simplistic to use. They're still expensive, and I think expense could be a hurdle to many companies. For example, a Cat and Jenny is going to cost a company £1,500 or so to equip a van with. You're probably still looking at £10,000 to buy a radar. So it's a big leap in financial outlay to have every team using a radar. But the biggest hurdle is competency and training. You can't just open up a radar and use it straight away and identify underground utilities. It takes a lot of experience. It takes a lot of training. You have to understand soil types. You have to understand the hyperbolas. It doesn't shout out, here's a pipe, here's a cable. I wish it was that simplistic. It's not. So there is a big skills gap there, and which is why there are specialist survey teams going out there. So when it comes to actually digging in the streets, we would like to think that a lot of contractors will already have a PAS 128 survey being undertaken, and they will have the data, whether it be on electronic format or an A4 sheet. They will have a map showing them where the underground utilities are, and the ideal process is they use the Cat and Jenny type locating to verify those that survey data before they dig. However, that's not always true, and sometimes they're just using record drawings and their knowledge of Cat and Jenny. Now, the knowledge of Cat and Jenny is another side issue, which I don't think I want to stray in too much, but Pete could talk about for hours on end. And there's people who really know how to use Cat and Jenny really well, and there's others that don't. In my limited knowledge, and Pete will acknowledge this, you ask to see the cat and it's a bit beaten up, it's dirty, it's got concrete, it's got mud on it, it's well used, it's in calibration, but it's well used. Then you ask to see the Jenny and it's virtually brand new. They haven't got it out. They've been using it on power and radio mode. They haven't been using it with the signal generator at all, and that is very dangerous, and it's far too commonplace. So there's a massive education program needed here. We need to have more engagement with contractors. And I know everybody on this call, obviously you are engaged, I'm engaged. We would love to do that and just raise awareness. We need to talk to trade associations as much as possible and try and get this out there so that people are better educated, better understanding. And it's not just the guys on the street, it's their supervisors, it's their managers. They need to invest in equipment and time and training to make sure their guys understand much better.
I think the other point, John, just to jump in, and this is where we're different to other countries, that what we have in the UK is the people who are digging in the streets, it is them who are responsible for the locating. And this is something I talk about quite a lot with delegates on courses. A lot of these guys, they've got to be competent in so many things. You know, they're repairing gas pipes, they're installing gas pipes. Cat and Jenny training is one small element of all their competencies. They're not an expert in the locating side of it. Whereas if you look at other countries, the United States, the people that do the locating are experts at it. That's what they do. But here we're expecting the person who's been competent in digging the hole, locating the cables, fixing the pipe, replacing the pipe, doing the jointing. It's only a very small part of what he's got to do. And I think that's where the radar side comes in about the training, the competency in that is that because these guys have got to be trained on so many subjects, whereas in other countries, the person who does the locating, that's what they do. That's what they're competent at. They're experts at it, and they're knowledgeable. And I think that's where we're different to other places in the world.
Yes, we are. I'm afraid so. Rightly or wrongly, we don't have well, we have a very limited dial before you dig. You can ring up the water, gas, telecom and electric, say, look, I've got a problem finding your asset, and they will come out and try and locate it, but it's not as advanced as other countries. Many other countries have dedicated service tracers for that particular utility type who will come out. We don't tend to have that as a whole.
Got a couple more questions. Sorry, Jan Willem,
Yes,
you did have your hand up. Is that you not got a question anymore?
Well, I was just wondering if there is, because I'm not that familiar with the UK situation, but if there is a kind of certification, let's say in the UK, or are there, let's say, if there would be a way to overcome some of these issues, basically.
Okay. Excuse me. Yes, there are certifications. Manufacturers and training providers do standard Cat and Jenny courses. They can vary hugely in length and competency. So they'll issue a certificate to say they've been on a Cat and Jenny course. But in terms of professional utility surveyors, we do have a certification program. That's called the QCF program that goes from level 2 to 6, I think it is, isn't it, Pete? Does it start at 2? There's no 1, is there? Yeah, thank you. And that's grades utility surveyors on their competency and gives them certification based on that. So we have a certification, national certification program for professional underground utility surveyors that covers radar, that covers EML, that covers total stations, record analysis, the whole lot, geospatial analysis. But in terms of Cat and Jenny training, there's lots of individual companies, training and manufacturers who do courses on how to use the equipment. But as far as I'm unaware, and I may be challenged here, I don't think there's a national recognised certification for Cat and Jenny type training.
There is a couple. ProQual, who do the utility mapping certification, they also have a level 2 in utility location. That's quite a popular qualification. We deliver on Cat and Jenny. You've also got the EUSR Category 1 qualification from Energy and Utility Skills. And there's a couple others out there. The problem I I have with these nationally recognised qualifications, and you know, we deliver them as well, is that all it says is you have to deliver a minimum standard. And if you look at the specification for these qualifications, so you could even go to 2 different providers and receive these 2 certifications, but you might get 2 completely different courses, because all the qualification is saying you have achieved this set of criteria. And I would argue, when you look at that criteria, that still doesn't make you an expert in the subject of locating things. So it is out there, but whether it's good enough, I don't know.
Yeah, the ProQual system. Now we've got to hold our hand up and say the ProQual system is the first of its type, and it's nationally recognised. There's still work to be done, to be honest. The categories were first engineered about 7 or 8 years ago. They need constant revision. It's a moving goalpost, and yes, we should be working more to tighten those up, to improve them. And Pete's right, it only shows a minimum standard, a bit like a driving license. You're allowed to drive a car, you can't enter Formula One. It's only experience and sometimes raw talent that will allow you to progress more beyond that. And yes, and though all the training courses, some of them go way beyond the minimum standard, but at the background that there's tick boxes where you have to go through to make sure you complete those minimum standards by ProQual. So yes, all training schemes are useful. I would encourage everybody to go through them and look at them in great detail. But yes, there's some deficiencies there, and we should always be looking at those and making them better. Thanks,
John. We've got another question from Jerry.
Hello, Jerry.
Yeah, good morning. John, thanks for this. I don't want to detract away from what you were talking about, but I think that the survey element's really, really important for me in relation to the fact that lots of other countries around the world provide a service to the contractor. Whereas, you know, trust me, I'm a doctor, springs to mind here for me is the fact that I'd still be expecting our guys to check. You know, we wouldn't be taking the word of somebody else. I'd still want a survey done before I actually did broke that ground.
Yes, absolutely. Especially in inner cities, it's so complex now with underground utilities. You really need a pre-survey doing, and you need teams on site who actually understand the data. And this is the thing: is you can hand out, a bit like handing out RAMs and method statements. You can hand them out to everybody. You've got to make sure they read them, make sure they understand them, and make sure they implement them. So again, there could be a skills deficiency there, and that's something that needs exploring. But you need to be able to understand the data. You need a team leader who's able to take a step back and say, I'm not going to allow this to happen until I'm absolutely sure that all the gang know exactly what they're doing, and they're fully compliant in all the health and safety regulations. And it's ongoing. When you're digging a hole, you don't just stop there. You test again. You get you go over with a cat and Jenny when you're down half a meter. You keep on testing until you finish the job. So yes, it's a realization and education thing all the way through the process.
John, I was just interested to pick up on that point about the dial before you dig element. You know, the bit where the asset owners can help people searching. And we've been to the States before and listened to presentations there, because they've got a very, very advanced way of, very set in industry way of the asset owners locating for the contractor. But there was some suggestion there, and I don't know whether it's widespread, but that actually the cost of doing those is so high for the asset owners across the country to keep sending people out to these dig sites, that actually the price has been squeezed down and down. And I think just off the top of my head, there was mention of $8 per locate per utility, and as you know, John, that's not very much money.
No, it's not.
To get out to site. And you might have 4, 5, 6 on a site, so there might be a bit of a multiplier. But the sort of inference was that the price had been pushed so far down that there wasn't enough money to get properly trained people out on site, and so the quality of the survey went down, and then the people did it anyway. So it's a really interesting area on how to make it right, because I totally understand that sort of jack of all trades bit that Pete was mentioning, and it makes a lot of sense. But then having the ownership of having done it yourself, and that you're going to be the one digging, I think there's an element there. And I just wonder if there's anything there from your experience of when someone else does the search, is it as connected as when you've done it yourself? Does that make sense?
Yes, I could only go back to, this is many years ago when I was I don't go on the site very much myself anymore, but when I was regularly going on site, we used to get British Telecom in sometimes to trace underground utilities, but well, to trace their telecom cables, and they would sometimes you'd get some really good guys out there, sometimes not so, but they were trained. They were trained to reduce the BT liability. So they would find a spot where they would find the underground cable, but then they'd put two boundary markers, and they typically be a meter that way and a meter that way. So they'd effectively give you a 2-meter corridor. They wouldn't say, look, we think the cable is there. They think, look, they'd crosshatch it and say, this is how wide it is, and we think there's a cable somewhere in this point. So they're not exactly pinpointing it. And yes, it's the training of the individual locator or surveyor within the within the utility asset owners company that really make a difference. And on the whole, I will say that they don't do this every day. They're not specialists in it, and there is a skills deficiency there.
Okay. No, Tori. I think Tori and Pete both with their hands up. To Tori, after you.
Shall I go first?
Yeah.
Thanks. Hi, I come from Geomatics, which is a company operating in the Nordics. And in the Nordics, we have, we just established in the UK. And the Nordics has a model a bit similar to the US, where the asset owners pay for at least most of the locating. And I absolutely agree with what you say, Richard, that the danger of having the asset owner side of the industry in that model driving down the cost and thereby the quality is really, it is extremely important. And it's something that I think is very important to hold at a high enough level. But I also think there is an advantage to having people who have that as their main trade, going out and doing the locating. But our experience is that there are two key competencies there, and one is doing the actual locating and having the methods. And I back home, I do encourage building standards like the PASS or adopting standards like the PASS, which we don't really have. But the other trade is the communication of the findings and putting those in the hands and the heads of the guys doing the work. And I think that's almost as critical in that model, where someone else comes, even if it's a professional surveying company in the UK or if it's the surveyors in the Nordic or US model, to spend enough time to actually get the knowledge transfer to the guys doing the actual excavation work, and not just their team, the site manager, the actual guys in the excavator, so that they not only understand where you think it's at, but also understand the uncertainties, because there are always uncertainties. And especially so if you're in a model where you don't take the time or money to use a radar, there will be higher uncertainties. And just knowing and understanding the uncertainties is often as critical or a very critical element in my experience. How do you experience that in that kind of understanding and knowledge of uncertainties, inherent uncertainties of the equipment and the methods?
Yep, there is. Again, you're absolutely right. How the data is presented, whether it be marks on the ground, a drawing, and now we're going into virtual reality, and there's also software you can put on some diggers so they alarm if they get close to a utility, because you've already fed the utility information into the software. It's moving into a whole different level at the moment, but the level of understanding can be variable, to say the least. A lot of guys, in my experience, who dig holes day in, day out, they have a lot of trust in their intuition, should we say, about where utilities run. They're fair enough, they've been doing it 20 years, and they will dig carefully. They know they've got enough experience to know how most utilities are laid, at what depths, etc. And they can be slightly dismissive sometimes about using extra technology and extra data to show where the underground utilities are, and they will still go with their gut instinct, and sometimes to their detriment. So I think, again, it's training and understanding where other people are coming from. This was very relevant to the presentation that you chaired last week, where we have utility asset owners and guys digging holes in the road who, to my mind, aren't really communicating with each other. They don't know what the other one wants, and so communication is key here.
Can I add a small comment to that? Because I think you touch a very important point. The new technologies, and they are amazing, and they will bring great benefits. But at the same time, at least in sort of a interim period, I'm afraid that they will create a false sense of security.
Yes,
Because
absolutely.
if you pick up a pad and you have the collated pack of statutory records from one source or the other, not entering that topic, and you think that's because it looks so good, and you start digging, you'll end up even worse off than you started.
Absolutely, the information has to be reliable. I'm afraid it's rubbish in, rubbish out. No matter how it looks, if the data isn't reliable, then yes, it can give a false level of sense of security, and it could be the downfall. I totally agree. Pete, you've got your hand up.
Just unmuting myself. It's just going. I put my hand up when we're talking about the survey side of it and competency and trusting in your own work. And I think it's really important. What we don't lose sight of is we do have these two levels of people that are locating. We have the surveyors and we have the teams digging the holes. And there is quite a big difference between ability and understanding. And I've said this before, and I mean no offense by saying this. I've had people on courses and I could train them 20 times and they still wouldn't get it. And sometimes you have to accept that some people are made for locating and some people aren't. And some of the, in terms of best practice, some of the best things I've seen, and we're working with one company now on this, is where we say, rather than trying to make 100 people really competent, let's have a selection of them. Let's pick 20 of them who do get it. Let's make them really, really competent. Let's use them to do the initial survey first. All the rest of the teams that are excavating still have the Cat and Jenny training. They're still going to do their own checks, but they're going to have this initial survey done by somebody else for the same company. Does that make sense what I'm saying? And it's worked really, really well that, the team comes out, they do the initial survey, and it's a requirement of HSG 47, as I'm sure you know. You have to use a Cat and Jenny, not only before, but during excavation. So we're not taking that away, but let's understand that we have got these differences in ability. Let's make some people really competent at it, get them to do the initial survey, not rely on the asset owner, actually have it in-house, make this core people competent at it and get them to the initial survey, and the other guys just do the checking as they dig, with the Cat and Jenny side of it. And I think that works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the permitting system, when they're actually digging, needs to be reinforced. Now, every company will have a permitting system of some description and sign off. Maybe we need to streamline that and look for some sort of nationally recognised permitting system and keep it simple. And so every gang member understands it, and basically make sure that the talent is there to look at underground utilities pre and post and during excavation.
Thanks, John. Sorry, I took you completely away from the subject you was talking about, but that was quite an enjoyable conversation anyway, I thought.
That's the whole point of this. Okay, Richard, could you put the slide back now, and we'll sort of continue on, and then we'll see what other questions come up.
Yeah, perfect. Do you want to hold on a second? So I think we're on that one, I think.
That one. That's perfect. Yes, thank you. So we were talking about the PAS 1 to 8 process, and I want to show you some examples now of the excavation side of PAS 1 to 8. Now, I do this quite a lot, and I wanted to show these examples. In particular, I wanted to draw you to the two photos on the left. Now, this is actually around Piccadilly Circus in London, and I wanted to explain that not all utilities are laid in the way that we would like, I think is the phrase I would use. If you look to the photo on the far left, you can see where the plant pot is, the black plant pot. Look what it's laying on. It's laying on a light well, and that light well is for a basement. And that basement protrudes out under the footpath, and it actually protrudes out about 2.5 meters under the footpath. And you'll see we've actually done an excavation there, and we found the electric cable there about 8-9 centimeters below the slab. Now, fortunately, we knew it was that shallow because we'd already done a survey of the area, and it was slabbed. So we lifted the slab, and we virtually did an archaeological dig with a trowel and a brush to unearth the utility because we knew it was so shallow. However, if someone had gone into that area with just the electric records, I haven't got a depth on there, maybe hadn't looked at the light well, looked at the situation and realised how shallow those electric cables were, and they'd gone in there with a drill, or they would have gone straight through those cables. It's very unnerving to see utilities and electrics in particular laid that shallow, and it's not uncommon, I'm afraid. In that particular area, they were all laid like that around the whole block. I've seen fibre and cable TV laid at very similar depths. there are regulations and guidelines as to how deep utilities should be laid. Not always followed, and obviously historically there's stuff that's been down there for many years that don't follow those rules and regs. So always be careful, look around the area and look at how shallow some of the utilities are. I work with one particular client at the moment where they buy sites for small supermarkets, and they're always looking for entrances and exit lanes, and they have to put a drop curb there. And there's times where they will not buy a site until they have a survey done, and they've exposed the utilities in the slit trench because they've been caught out too many times, and the fibre in particular is really shallow, and it costs more money to move the fibre than it is to develop the site. And they'll walk away from a site if the utilities are too shallow and they can't put their drop curbs in. So again, hugely expensive to move, and be really careful about shallow utilities. The two photos on the right is more of an example about how we deal with heritage sites. You can see it's cobbled. The whole area was a heritage area, and we had to replace everything in exactly the same way. And the photo on the far right shows that we've hopefully done a very good job of relaying the wearing course after the excavation. And I actually went back to that site a couple of weeks later once the concrete had dried off, and you couldn't see where we'd been. So the idea is we get in there, we expose the utilities, we show our clients exactly what's going on, and then we replace and hopefully return it to its natural condition. And so that this is in design phase, so that we can design around the utilities. What I hate to see is we have a designer, they design a scheme, then they work out where the utilities go, and then they redesign. What we're trying to say is get us in extra early, and let the utility survey and the slit trenches influence your design. Don't design and redesign, get us in early, and it's all about timing. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Type A, because unfortunately Type A, opening up in the street scene, you have to get permits, you have to either get a vacuum excavation or hand dug trial pits. It's not cheap, but it can save so much money by daylighting or visually identifying these underground utilities and seeing what goes on in terms of design and build. So I implore people that if you need to know exactly where the underground utilities are, please consider doing excavations in certain areas, because it will really pay dividends. So that's the PAS 1 to 8 process, going from D to A. As you can see, each phase has a cost to it and has a cost benefit to it. So I strongly believe if you follow that path and have the right people doing it, the right processes, and using the right equipment, it will reduce risk. And this is what it's all about, is reducing risk. We'll never have no risk. We want to reduce risk. And by reducing risk, we obviously increase health and safety, but also we're able to stop cost overruns, delays on site, etc., etc. Now, Birmingham University, I don't think we've got Nicole on today, but Birmingham University have done lots and lots of research into the PAS 1 to 8 process, and they did some research with Transport for London, and Transport for London use the PAS 1 to 8 process for all their engineering needs now. And they found, Transport for London found that every pound that they spent on the PAS 1 to 8 process, they recouped that 3 times over in health and safety improvements, less delays on site, less redesign costs, etc., etc. So they found that by spending a little bit more money in the pre-design, they are saving money in the whole process. So not only is it a health and safety benefit, but it's having a cost benefit to them as well. So that essentially brings an end to this little presentation or little chat about PAS 1 to 8. I know we've been taking questions as we've been going along, but is there anybody else who would like to ask any questions? Yes, Fionn.
Yeah, morning, John. Thanks for the talk. One thing I wanted to pick up on that you mentioned earlier was that you mentioned there's a massive education program needed, and approaching trade associations and supervisors and managers and so on. I think one of the challenges we face, particularly at LSBUD, is getting even beyond that and educating, say, the public, maybe that householder who's got a large pond to dig in their back garden or something like that. And I wondered if you've got any thoughts on reaching that wider audience.
to be honest, it's not something I come across every day, and I know you guys do a great deal of work on that. For example, farmers as well. Farmers are notorious. They've got pipelines crossing their land, and they're busy guys, and they've obviously got access to big digging equipment as well, usually, and tractors and so on, and they can be someone you need to target because they can do a lot of damage to themselves and to the underground infrastructure very, very quickly. It's not really in my general day-to-day business to deal with privateers with land, but again, it's education. How we engage with those. I would hazard a guess it's best to go back to the asset owners and put flyers out to the customers in terms of when they get billed or online billing, and give them information as to underground utilities and the dangers of. But yeah, it comes to spring and people are putting a new patio down, they're putting a new pool in their back garden. Yes, there is a danger to households, and it's more likely they do damage to the supplies that actually supply their house. But I have seen instances of a British pipeline, oil pipe, going through someone's back garden. It does happen. You can have major utilities going very close to a domestic residence. You can't just assume that there's nothing there. So the only way I could think of engaging with people like that is to engage them at point of bill, because they will look at their bills, I'm afraid, and maybe engage with the asset owners and see whether we can target them at that point.
Terrific, thank you very much.
And then
Sorry,
David Hart has
Thank
got
you.
his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Did you say that it was TfL made £3 worth of savings on build costs for every pound spent on design?
Yes, I did. Yes.
£3, right? Okay.
Yes.
Right, just wanted to clarify that.
Yes, every pound that TfL spent on the PAS 1 to 8 process, they claimed to be saving £3.
Fantastic. Okay, thank you for that.
That was on 16 test sites, and the research. There's actually a paper on it. If you Google Birmingham University,
yeah, got that link.
Yeah, and there's a doctor there called Nicole Meche, and you'll see various papers that she's done, and that's one of about half a dozen papers. It's quite a lengthy process, but you should be able to find it there.
Excellent. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Perfect.
Anybody else?
I think we're probably coming up to the hour as well. I'm conscious not to keep people beyond the hour. John, I just wanted to say thank you very much indeed. I think that's been really interesting. We've certainly found it very, very interesting. As ever, there's lots of debate and probably more questions than answers. But I think the thing that what we're trying to do is raise the profile of those questions so people are aware of them. And I think there's also things that we can take for future sessions to maybe focus on one particular part of it, whether it's the sort of the skills that Pete was talking about and competency requirement, or it might even be equipment. I'm not sure, but I think we'd love to know about anyone else with a thought to continue discussions going. You can see there. Hopefully, you can see if I'm sharing properly that John's details there for, and I'm sure John is always available for his expert advice on these areas. And I think if we can probably just close on the feedback. If please do feedback any thoughts on how it's gone today. As I say, we tried to make it as relaxed as possible, and hopefully people have got things from it today. The next session is Jerry and Rob Kelly talking about how they've been able to enable a safe digging process for over 3,000 employees, which will be great. Just to take some of those thoughts today on sort of from the surveying to the contractor element. And then on the next session booked in on the 4th of Feb, there is about agricultural engagement. So another thing we touched on briefly today, and we have got a few more that are in the sort of design phase, so to speak. So lots more to come. I think, just want to say thank you very much for everyone joining today. And John, probably anything further from you to add?
I would just like to say thank you for everybody engaging. I think there's massive challenges ahead. We've got big technological advances coming ahead. The market is moving constantly, but we've got a lot to be proud of. It's very easy to look on the negatives and that we're not doing everything right, but we are improving. But we've made huge strides of where we were 10 years ago. So I think we should give all ourselves a pat on the back for that, and congratulate ourselves. But it's never ending. We need to keep on investing. We need to keep on talking, and communication is key here. I'm happy to do chats with any of you individually, and maybe even presentations, because I think it's so important to get this message across. So please feel free to contact me. And other than that, I'd like to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and hopefully a much better 2021. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Great.
Thanks, John.
Thank you very much, all.
Thank you.